chapter in Turkish Airlines history has just begun. Now, our new home is Istanbul Airport. We look forward to welcoming you to this major hub, connecting countries, people, and experiences together. Join us on this unique journey. Turkish Airlines.
Bayan affords me access to a demographic that can sustain the kind of conversation I think we need to have in the Muslim community. I don't think we need to sit around talking to each other. We need to be talking to the people we think about. And this is part of the whole point of Bayan.
What I really like about Bayan is that this is an institution that is firmly grounded in the broad diversity of the Islamic tradition.
We're heading right now to the Haram, the sacred mosque of Mecca. MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah, the Hujjaj are right now in the tents.
We pray that this rain is a sign of acceptance.
Indeed, a very, very beautiful time right now.
Welcome to ISNA Con 2019. What's your superpower for social good?
Assalamu alaikum, can everyone hear me? We are about to start our session on supervillains, and this session runs about an hour, and we have 5 very prominent speakers. So I'm going to start very quickly in order to get each one of them to speak very succinctly on a subject for about 5 minutes. Hopefully, inshallah, we'll be able to go around at least twice, but each one is a specialist in their area, so I want to make sure I give them enough time. I would like to begin with Sister Dalia Fahmy, who is an associate professor of political science at Long Island University, where she teaches courses on U.S. foreign policy, world politics, international relations, military and defense policy, causes of war, and politics in the Middle East. Dr. Fahmy is a senior fellow at the Center for Global Policy in Washington, D.C., and a visiting scholar at the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights, and UNESCO chair at Rutgers University for 2018. Dalia, when we watch the news, it seems like the whole world is on fire, and it's so incredibly overwhelming. Can you give us a sense of how to look at the world and not be overwhelmed?
So according to United Nations, 14 of the 15 countries that experience the most war deaths today, war deaths, deaths that are made from man-made causes, deaths that are made from guns and bombs and violence, 14 of the 15 are Muslim-majority countries. If we just look at what's happened in the past year there have been 23,000 deaths in Afghanistan, 24,000 in Iraq. In the Mexican drug war, since 2006, we've seen over 100,000 deaths. Mexico is number 15, right, for the Mexican drug war. In Syria, we have seen over 500,000 deaths, and since 2011, it's been 60,000 deaths. Somalia, 5,701. And since 1991, 500,000 deaths in Somalia. In Yemen, which the United Nations says is the greatest humanitarian crisis that we will face today, not just because of hunger, because of violence, and cutting off ports from food and aid. The top 15 countries that are in conflict, 14 of them are Muslim-majority countries. And when we think that what is happening in the world, we have become so deconditioned to these numbers that it's so easy to turn the channel. It's become so easy to look the other way. It's become so easy for us to hear that there's been a bombing at a wedding, and we say, oh no, that's terrible, and we turn the channel, or we make a post on Facebook, and it's become so normalized, the amount of violence in the world, that it's something has happened to us, that it's not propelled us to actually think about what is the Muslim role in beginning something like an anti-war movement. Why is it that it's become difficult for us to attain a moral compass on the issue of war and international relations? You know, when we think about compassion with those who are suffering in places like Syria, or Myanmar, or in China, or in Palestine, or in all of the countries of the Muslim world today, we think about that the world is in need of this true compassion, a true understanding that every single one of those lives matter, that every single one of those victims has a name, that every single one of those people has a story. Compassion won't let us ignore this reality. Compassion will make us, for example, protest against drone strikes and of landmines and the perpetual growth of the military-industrial complex in this country. That economies of war are growing at the expense of so many unnamed people. We think about what compassion makes us silent on the drums or the drumbeats of war with places like Iran today, ignoring the fact that there will be innocent victims. Compassion won't let us ignore Syria. It won't let us be blind to the worst famine about to happen. You know, when we talk about summertime, you know, the summer is not over in parts of the world. According to the United Nations, places like Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, and Yemen are facing mass starvation. And yet we become desensitized enough to look the other way. The 2011 Arab Spring opened our eyes to the potential of people coming together and saying, no, not in our name. Not in our name against state violence, not in our name against oppression, against autocratic regime, and not even against terrorist groups. But what we did learn that since the Arab Spring, 260,000 people have been victimized, died directly because of this. Compassion won't let us look away from a lot of what's happening internationally, and it won't let us look away from what's happening domestically. We think about how people are self-soothing at this moment. Drug use is on the rise. Suicide is on the rise. We have places in this country. We think about how interconnected our stories are. That mass incarceration of activists all over the world, there's also mass incarceration of our youth here in the United States. And so while the world might feel like it's on fire and it's overwhelming, the question is, why have we become so complacent? Why is it easy for us to turn the channel or to only focus on certain issues and not see the interconnectedness of our human story and our human narrative? Brothers and sisters, if you don't think that the world today needs an anti-war movement led by Muslims in the West to understand that the greatest victims of war are our relatives overseas, then what are we doing? If we don't think that compassion should propel us to actually become activists and say none of this can happen in our name, none of it can happen on our watch, that we will not turn the channel, that we will not look away, that the complacency that they want us to feel is not going to happen, then we have to ask ourselves, do we really care about those people over there?
Thank you so much. So my second question will be for Dr. Azim Ibrahim. And before I introduce him, I'll ask him the question so he has a chance to think about it. Based on what Dr. Fahmy has just mentioned, the leader of Burma was someone that a lot of people had hoped for. Exactly what Dahlia was saying, someone who would be a champion of democracy and human rights. And yet she's transformed from a democracy icon to a supervillain. So I'm going to ask Dr. Ibrahim to comment on that, but while he's thinking, I'm going to give his introduction. He is the director at the Center for Global Policy and adjunct research professor at the Strategy Studies Institute, U.S. Army War College. He received his PhD from the University of Cambridge and has previously been appointed an International Security Fellow at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and is a World Fellow at Yale University. He is the author of the seminal book on the Rohingya crisis. So Dr. Ibrahim, what went wrong?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, let me say thank you to you, Zarqa, and everybody else. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be here amongst my esteemed colleagues. The Rohingya crisis is a very interesting crisis because the theme of this session, this year's ISNA, is superheroes and supervillains. And I do not believe there's anybody else in the world who has transformed so swiftly from being a superhero into a supervillain than Aung San Suu Kyi, the pro-democracy icon of Burma. You know, one of the questions I get asked most often is that in my book on the Rohingyas, I argued that the Rohingya are the most persecuted minority in the world, and they have been over the last 50 years. So why did this crisis, why is it happening now on the scale that it is? Why did the Myanmar authorities, the Myanmar military, decide to execute the final solution in 2017? Now, when you study genocide, it is very interesting because it is very common for the perpetrators and the organizers and the architects of the genocide to undertake a dry run, to undertake a test run, to see what is going to be the reaction of the international community, what is going to be the reaction of local actors. Are we able to get away with this? Are we able to execute this final solution? And the military in Burma tried their dry run in October 2016 when they invaded a number of Rohingya villages. They expelled over 150,000 Rohingya into Bangladesh, burnt down so many villages, raped so many women, and they learned a very important, critical lesson. The most important lesson that they learned is that Aung San Suu Kyi defends the military in public. Aung San Suu Kyi became a shield for all criticism against the military in the public domain. For example, when the BBC's journalist Fergus Keane asked her, there is ethnic cleansing going on in your country, she said ethnic cleansing is far too strong a term to use for what is happening. Both sides are equally to blame. So thus drawing a parallel between the aggressor and the victim. When the United Nations produced a report in March 2017 saying that 52% of Rohingya women had been raped, she said on her Facebook page, this is fake rape. When the United Nations also asked for a full-scale commission inquiry, she said, this will not be very helpful, and it was her office that blocked the UN from access into Myanmar and still continues to do so. So the question is, how did we get Aung San Suu Kyi so wrong? How could the international community who awarded her a Nobel Prize get it so fundamentally wrong that we made her into a superhero and now it transpires she's actually a supervillain? And I believe the answer lies actually within ourselves. I believe that we in the West, we have a need. We have a need to have our heroes on a pedestal. We love our heroes to be on a pedestal. We like to have them untarnished. Nobody wants to hear the shortcomings of our heroes. Nobody wants to hear about the shortcomings of Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Mother Teresa. We don't want to hear that stuff. We need to have our heroes pure. And Aung San Suu Kyi was the best icon. You think of her story, an Oxford-educated Nobel laureate, the daughter of the founding general of Burma, speaks the Queen's English, she's beautiful, she's articulate, she's now going back to her own country and she's going to transform her backward country into our country. We in the West, we love this stuff and we make this mistake over and over again with almost every leader. If you remember Saif al-Gaddafi, the great PhD from the London School of Economics who was going to transform his country, or Bashar al-Assad, the London-trained ophthalmologist who was being courted by Tony Blair as the great reformer and turned into the greatest mass murderer of our time, or Kim Jong-un, educated at a Swiss boarding school, loves basketball in Disneyland, now threatening us all with nuclear annihilation. We think people have come to the West, they've tasted our democracy, they've been educated in our schools, and they're going to turn their backward countries into our country without realizing that these people are actually ideologically committed. They are amongst the elites in their society, and attending Oxford or Georgetown makes them the elites of the elites in their society. So we should see people for who they are and not necessarily put them on a pedestal. And Aung San Suu Kyi, I think, is the most telling tale of us not looking at people beyond what they actually are.
Thank you. Now I'm turning to Hannah Zuberi, who is the Director of Outreach for Justice for All based in Washington, D.C., where she works on the Burma Task Force, Save Uyghur Campaign, and just launched the Free Kashmir Action. A journalist with years of experience both in print and television, she is the editor-in-chief of MuslimMatters.org, the most widely read publication in the Islamic digital economy, where she writes and publishes commentaries on issues related to Muslims living in the West. And I want you to put a face to all, the struggles of Kashmir. What is it like to be a woman living there now?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm happy to be here, free to speak my mind. If I was a Kashmiri woman, I would not have spoken to my family across the world for almost 27 days. There would be checkpoints every time I leave my house, if I dare to cross the curfew, every few feet in my city. There is no access to medication, and the feeling of enslavement is killing us, even if I am alive. Mass rape and torture was something that is not new to us. I shake when I see a person in uniform. I live in fear for the lives of my sons and the safety of my daughters. My neighbor's son has been missing. They took away so many young men, even 11-year-old Yusuf. When they detain people there, they strip them naked with wooden sticks and beat them with wooden sticks. Zarina's son was electrocuted. They tell me they dunk detainees' head in water and they put chili powder, mirche in them. We're waiting, but we're waiting for what we don't know. It's only by Allah's will and the luck of the draw that I'm sitting here in front of you, and my sisters and brothers in Islam are suffering all over the world. But I can tell you, freedom is not free. As one of my dear brothers, Chaplain Tarif in Maryland, says, those who truly live and the ones who are truly free and fulfilled are the ones who are willing to make sacrifices and pay the price of struggling against our nafs. They're willing to serve others and commit their lives to serving and freeing others. Brothers and sisters, I want to tell you there's a genocide alert for Kashmir. And we work on stopping genocide, so I want you to listen carefully and don't make the mistake that we made for our Rohingya brothers and sisters. 6 years of work it took us. 6 years to get the House of Representatives in Congress to declare it a genocide. If warning signs had been heeded, there's several stages of genocide. There are about 10 stages, according to Professor George Stanton, who's a respected genocide scholar and runs genocidewatch.org. And it's a process that develops, and the stages are pretty predictable. And when he declared a genocide alert, this is something that we need to take very, very seriously. And I would also urge people not to use the word genocide too lightly, because I see that on social media as well. Something happens and we call it, genocide of this person and these groups of people. I would urge people not to do that. But there is a serious genocide alert for the people of Bangladeshi descent, the Muslims in Assam and in Kashmir. So this is a stage where we have to be prepared, especially in Assam. It's on the stage 7 of preparation. So the brothers and sisters over here, I would urge them to keep this in mind as we go forward in our discussions on Kashmir.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hatem Bazian is a co-founder and professor of Islamic law and theology at Zaytuna College and the first accredited Muslim liberal arts college in the United States. In addition, Professor Bazian is a lecturer in the departments of Near Eastern and Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. I wanted you to talk about Ilham and Rashida Tlaib and how they were denied entry into Israel.
Assalamu alaikum. I guess we're all have been following the news of Netanyahu, responding to Trump's request or pressure that he denies the entry of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib to visit Palestine, and accordingly because of their support for the BDS movement. But simultaneously during that same time period, there are 42 other congressmen and elected officials that actually were visiting Palestine on a fully paid trip that is paid by AIPAC, which is the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, the lobby that continues to put pressure to maintain the United States policy decisively and unilaterally on the side of Israel at the expense of the Palestinians. Now, I would say that President Trump is trying to hinge his 2020 elections on a number of things. One of the things that he's putting his horse on is Islamophobia, and we're aware of that. The second, he is attempting to put himself as the champion of pro-Israel or being the most pro-Israel president in the hope that he will actually push or cause the shift among Jewish Americans to vote Republican. Now, if you don't know, the majority of Jewish Americans actually vote Democratic. And even in the last election, midterm election, about 79% of them voted in the Democratic election. But he's hoping to cause a shift in order to expand his diminishing base within the upcoming election. The second, which I think is very more critical for the campaign, is he's hoping some of the top donors that contribute to the political campaigns of the Democrats, which are pro-Israel, will shift their donation and will contribute to his campaign. So we need to understand the dynamics that Trump is undertaking vis-a-vis the Palestine issue, and what is he attempting to accomplish, and what are the lines of demarcation, and why Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are fulfilling or at least serving that purpose that Trump is unleashing on a national level. However, when we are looking at the American public in relations to Palestine, we are seeing that there is a drastic shift in the support for Israel among both the younger Jewish population. Anyone from the Jewish community 35 or under is actually shifting their support, and Israel is no longer the central aspect, central construct of their identity, and they're beginning to align themselves with the pro-Palestinian movement in the United States and internationally. And I think it's important here to speak about the position of Jewish Voice for Peace, which have shifted into an anti-Zionist perspective, if not now, breaking the silence, even bending the arc, which is still committed to a Zionist narrative and approach. That shift is also slowly taking place in the United States. And I think that dynamic has to be understood as we speak in relations to Palestine and the Palestinians. The last element is also the success or the prevailing success of the PDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanction. A number of years back, it was seen to be as a marginal issue. The fact that it's being attacked at this point in the United States, it's not due to its weakness, it's rather due to its success and strength. And importantly, when both AIPAC and some of the major Jewish organizations pursued legislation to actually criminalize BDS, we have filed lawsuits against them, and those lawsuits we have won. The lawsuit in Texas, in here in particular, the community, especially CARE and their legal team, was very instrumental in filing the lawsuit and winning the case here in Texas. So you could actually now boycott Israel and you don't have to lose your job. I challenged the law in Arizona as well. Arizona State passed a legislation to prohibit PDS. Likewise, we filed a lawsuit. I myself refused to sign the contract for a speaking engagement in Arizona State University. We filed a lawsuit against the state, and we won the case, and I came and gave a lecture on PDS in Arizona and invited guests, and we have another case in Kansas. So in that sense, they, I think, made the strategic mistake in thinking by legislating to silence people that they will win the day, and I think what happened is they have shifted the boundaries of debate into a debate about fundamental rights, and I think that is a winnable cause for the Palestinians, and I think the wind of change are taking place, and we need to be part of it.
Thank you. Safa Zarzour is an educator, attorney, and a community activist. Professionally, he is the superintendent of universal schools in Illinois and Indiana. He is also the principal of Zarzour Law. Previously, he has served as Secretary General of ISNA, General Counsel and Chief Operations Officer of the Zakat Foundation of America, and Chief Executive Officers of ICRA International Foundation, and is an adjunct law professor at Loyola Law School. So I have a quick question. Before Trump was elected, the chief supervillains of the world were in Syria. It was ISIS, and that was what dominated New York Times, every headline newspaper in the world. And since Trump's been elected, they've literally, Syria is almost off the newspaper, and it's just been about Trump and his tweets. Can you update us about what is going on in that country?
Absolutely. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Indeed, Syria is practically totally off the map after 2016. But the fact of the matter is that the Syrian tragedy continues, and I'm one of perhaps few people who continue to call what started in Syria as a revolution, that it was a revolution that was peaceful, people looking for freedom in a country that has lived under dictatorship, brutal dictatorship since the 1970s. And for 8 months, actually, that's the admission of the dictator himself, Bashar al-Assad, that for 8 months, the revolution was peaceful, and people were actually being gunned down on the streets, tens of them, if not hundreds, and no response, no physical response, no violent response, until the very government of Syria basically released the supervillains at that time, ISIS members who were in Syrian prisons, by the way, after having used them in Iraq during the 2003 invasion and then collected them literally, put them in prisons in Syria, released all of them early 2012, and they basically put them in every area or sent them or facilitated their traveling into all the areas that have left the control of the regime. And then the violence started. Since then, as a way of update, Syria has had 23 million citizens back in 2011. Today, about 6 million of them are refugees outside of the country. 6 million. 3.5 are in Turkey alone. About 800,000 are in Lebanon, about 500 to 600,000 in Jordan, and then about 200 to 300,000 in Iraq, and then the rest are spread all over the world. The Arab world, Egypt, Sudan are two notably countries with contingent, with no, large Syrian contingent refugees, and a lot of people in Europe. Myself, for example, I come from a large family. I have 12 brothers and sisters. Literally half of them now are refugees outside of the country, between Turkey and Europe. And my condition is not unusual as a Syrian expatriate. Also, I myself also have family members that have been killed by the regime. I have a nephew who continues to be imprisoned by the regime. In addition to those 6 million people, there's 8 million people displaced internally. Again, 4 million of them are in the province of Idlib, which is one of 14 provinces of Syria, and it's not the largest by any stretch, but it has 4 million internally displaced Syrian, and the rest of the 4 million are dispersed in other provinces throughout the country. So literally you have 13 million people out of 23 who are refugees, either internally or externally. As far as infrastructure, 75 to 80% of infrastructure in Syria is destroyed. And the regime seemed to have a nag for targeting hospitals, schools, and mosques. Basically, and when you realize that the areas under the control of the regime is relatively safe and relatively unscathed because the opposition doesn't have any firepower, literally 90% to 95% of the infrastructure outside of the regime control is totally destroyed. The last count I had was about 1,600 mosques have been destroyed, over like thousands, maybe like 2,000 to 3,000 schools. Hospitals, especially lately, have been the preferred target of the regime. So the situation continues to be very dire. And as was mentioned earlier, that the leader who now is doing all of that is someone that was very much educated in Europe, was being basically groomed to be the gentle face of dictatorship in Syria, to rule after his father died. The constitution of the country was literally changed in 5 minutes to lower the age of the president from 40 years of age to 34 years of age, because he at the time was 34 years and like 7 months old. So they literally changed it exactly to fit him, and then became president. So the situation is dire. But I can tell you this, I have been inside the country about 6 times since 2011, mostly on the north side, that's outside of the control of the government. And I can tell you that the people of Syria are absolutely determined that this will not just go like that, and that the sacrifices they have made will not go away. Almost officially, the United Nations, as Sister Dalia mentioned, 500 to 600,000, but the numbers really are closer to 1 million people who were murdered by this regime. And if you look at, after that, the wounded and disabled, about 1.5 million to 2 million. And after that, by the way, there's about 200,000 people who are imprisoned. And those of you who follow the news here, the law that was passed by Congress, Caesar, basically documents the killing of 11,000 people under torture in the regime's prisons. 55,000 pictures were obtained by someone who basically escaped the regimes and took with him a cache of pictures, because he was part of literally the apparatus that was in charge of documenting those killings. Because, by the way, they literally adopted a method used by Hitler when he was basically exterminating the Jews and other people that opposed his rule in Germany, where he would document the killing of people. So literally, when someone finally perishes under torture, they would send a photographer who would take specific pictures, like 6 pictures, in specific poses of them, and then they create an archive of the person, their arrest record, etc., why, how they died, when they died, and all that, with no fear of reprisal and no fear of repercussion, because of the fact that they really have gotten away with murder so far, and they believe they will continue to do so. Syria, in particular, happens to be in a place where there are regional conflicts happening between Iran, Turkey, and Israel to the south, as well as the interests of some Arab regimes of extending their reach into that area, but particularly the Gulf countries, and then the superpowers, both Russia and the United States, particularly Russia wanting to regain its basically status and stature as an international player, and Syria was the test case that they chose to do so. But as I mentioned, the people of Syria, I can tell you, absolutely will not stop, no matter what happens. Even if things settle down or seem to be settling down, that is very, very temporary. And when we talk about superheroes, I am at awe and amazed at the superheroes within Syria that really are continuing to build in the areas that continues to be under their control. The spirit of the resistance continue to operate under extreme odds, all functions of civil society. You have local councils that are self-policing. In one of the visits that I had in northern of Syria, I was in an area called Darat Izza, and I can tell you that I witnessed myself 13 and 14 years old kids being in charge of making sure that the trash is collected. They literally are acting as the sanitation department for the town. 13 and 14 years old. I witnessed myself a traffic accident. There is no police, there is no government. People literally solving their issues on their own. Like the people came down, they talked, they solved the matter. People are insisting that they will go on with their lives. They will continue resisting until they reach their freedoms. And make no mistake about it, everywhere, whether it's Syria or Yemen, or especially in the Arab world, but everywhere where there have been unrest in the last few years, it's not about international conspiracy. It's not about, it is about people wanting their freedom. If there's an international conspiracy, it's against those who are seeking their freedoms in that region. And I know for a fact that that freedom will be earned and will be gained with, obviously after 8 years, very, very heavy price, but it will be because of those superheroes that are on the ground and those who are supporting them with anything they can, including nonprofits, charitable organizations from the United States with support and donations from the Muslims and other good people of the United States. So to me, it is a struggle that is far beyond politics and far beyond balance of powers. It is about that human need for freedom that will never die, will never go away, no matter what. Thank you.
So Dalia, I want to go from his comments to domestic superheroes in American government, and I want to specifically talk about the 4 women who are known as the Squad. And they are very brave women to speak about human rights at a time when it's very difficult to talk about human rights in the face of Trump. And some people are saying they may cost the Democrats the election. What is your opinion on that?
So human rights is an interesting issue because, believe it or not, in international relations, human rights was not on our radar as part of the conversation just for about the past 10, 15 years, right? Human rights was not an international goal. And so when people are talking about human rights and being critiqued for it, is because it could be that kind of public speaking can undermine the status quo. Those of us who study violence know that there are 3 types of violence. There's direct violence, a bomb falling, a shooting of a mosque, right? Direct violence is a direct killing. Then there's indirect violence. For example, in Yemen, the closing of ports that leads to starvation, right? So you have direct violence, which is the bombs falling, the use of guns against people, and indirect violence, mass starvation during times of war because of the closure of ports. But then there's something called the culture of violence. And the culture of violence is everything that causes us to look the other way. Direct violence and indirect violence cannot exist without the culture of violence. What they're trying to do, and many activists are trying to do, is shine a light on the reality of the culture of violence, is shine a light on the fact that direct and indirect violence happen on our watch. And so that changing of the status quo, highlighting that we exist in a parameter of a culture of violence. The culture of violence, again, is everything that exists to make us feel like, number 1, we can't do anything, and number 2, that this is just okay, that I can look away because I can't do anything. Direct violence, basically war, and indirect violence is starvation, mass starvation of people, both domestically and internationally, cannot exist with that perpetuation of the culture of violence. And when people shine a light on it, this is when they become no longer palatable to the establishment. Now look, I know we're at ISNA, and so I'm going to take off my professor hat for a second and just be my Muslim self. And when we think about what is really at stake, when the Prophet ﷺ was talking about da'wah and wants to bring hidayah to everybody, he says in a parable, I feel like I'm standing in front of a fire and everybody's rushing into the fire. And I'm trying to catch one person, right? But then their son falls in. I catch the son, the parents go. I go to this tribe, the other tribe goes in. What is the Prophet telling us, is that we are only responsible for the ones that we can actually save. We're not responsible for all of humanity. You can hear the numbers about Syria. You can look at what's happening in Yemen and say, this is just too much. But we're not asked to save 9 million people. We're asked to talk about the one orphan that we can save, the one orphan we can sponsor, the one individual. And so if we think about what our prophetic tradition tells us, we're not going to be asked about anything other than the complicitness of our silence. The structure of violence, direct and indirect, cannot exist if the culture of violence doesn't exist. And the culture of violence, both domestically in terms of turning a blind eye to the prison industrial complex, and the fact that, for example, in where I teach in New York, 1 in 3 black men will go to prison. Not because they're more violent, but because they're black. And that their behavior is constantly policed. I can turn a blind eye, but that's only because the culture of violence allows for this perpetuation. If we are not the community that says cultures of violence, again, that which tells us I can't do anything about it, and that which makes us look the other way, that cannot perpetuate, then brothers and sisters, all of this is happening on our hands and on our watch. It becomes our obligation to say, who can I save? What can I do? I can't save all of humanity, but I can stop that one person. What the Prophet is telling us in that parable is, I need you to stand next to me and help me catch more.
So Azim, launching off of what Dahlia said about the culture of violence, Buddhists were always known as the peace-loving religion, the ones that were the good guys, and the Muslims were the ones who had the culture of violence. And yet things have turned so much in Myanmar. What in your opinion, has created this culture of violence against the Rohingya people in that country?
Well, the Rohingya were always seen as being illegal interlopers from Bangladesh. And this did not happen all of a sudden. It took a long time for it to actually happen. This is a mechanism by which you start to dehumanize an individual, and you essentially take away their humanity until they're seen as nothing less than animals, and thus you can legitimately start killing them and ethnically cleansing them. You know, this is turning out to be one of the most depressing panels on ISNA. And ISNA so far, you know, we have so many challenges in the Muslim world, from Syria to Kashmir to Palestine, and it seems to be a never-ending list of depression. But I will make a very bold statement here. I believe that the biggest challenge that the Muslim world will face over the next 40 years, certainly within our lifetime, is going to be the rise of China. This is going to change the geopolitical landscape like we haven't experienced, certainly, in our lifetime. What is happening in China with the Uyghur Muslims is just a taste of things to come. You see, the number one thing China fears is not that there will be an invasion from the US. The number one thing that they fear is that the economy is going to slow down and there will be a popular uprising against the regime. So what they are doing in Xinjiang is essentially a large test laboratory. It is essentially a large experiment to figure out how do you use the latest technologies, the latest techniques to control a large population with all these techniques. And once they have mastered this, they will export this to the rest of the country, and they will also export it to regimes around the globe. Countries like Venezuela and the Philippines are already buying this technology. So this is a taste of things to come we will see throughout the whole of the Muslim world as technology mastered to how to control a large population. Now, China is essentially expanding at a rapid rate. Very soon, certainly within our lifetime, it will become the largest economy in the world. It will become a global superpower. And China's model is very different from other empires in the past. Other empires, the British Empire and the Americans, they built military bases around the world. They colonized countries. China is going through a process of economic colonization. They are essentially getting countries, most of the Muslim countries, into huge amounts of debt that these countries cannot service. And then when they cannot service it, they renegotiate it, and China essentially takes over national assets on those countries. They did exactly this thing in Sri Lanka, for example, with President Rajapaksa and the port. Pakistan, for example, is indebted to China over $62 billion. With interest, it's over $90 billion. This is a loan that Pakistan cannot service, and it is only a question of time when they start taking over national assets of Pakistan, and Pakistan becomes a client state. And we have already seen the effects of this. When Muslim countries, I think there was 22 Muslim countries signed a letter fully supporting China and the repression of the Uyghurs. Every single Muslim country signed this letter, including Pakistan, including Saudi Arabia, including Kuwait, every Muslim country. And this is indicative of what we are now going to see. Any country that is relying on China, even in the smallest way, will not be able to be neutral bystander. They will have to be fully on board with the China project. They will have to be fully supportive of China and their oppression. And this is a Cold War 2.0 that we will see, the world divided between the United States and the world divided between, and on the other side, countries that are part of the Chinese empire. I believe that this is going to be one of the most defining challenges and one of the most difficult things that we will see around the Muslim world and things to come.
We have a question from the audience. Many of us know about these issues in Myanmar, Syria, Kashmir, but don't know what we can do to help. What can we do as average American citizens? Hannah?
Assalamu alaikum. This is an excellent question because we're trying to beat these supervillains and it doesn't seem like we can do much because the problem is so huge. Well, what do we do is start breaking this problem down into smaller pieces so it's actually stuff that we can do. So I'm going to suggest several things. One thing is we need to break up with capitalism. How do we do this, right? We need to start with our own homes. We need to make ethical choices when we're buying stuff, when we can vote with our own money. So overwhelming majority of the people are living in poverty, and 62 richest people in the world control money. Many of these things that we see are land grabs. It's resources that they're after, right? China, Burma, India. We need to then educate people. All of us have that capability. We can step out, and many Americans don't know what is happening overseas because it's so far away, it's so out there. Who cares, right? But if we start linking detention camps at our borders to concentration camps in China, right? Separation of families at our border to separation of families in Kashmir. This is something that appeals to people. They can understand that. Then it brings it closer to home. The other thing that we can do is we can adopt a cause. All of these causes over here. Adopt one. Religiously work on it on your own. Separate 5 minutes of your day, 10 minutes of your day, an hour of your day. Comment on media that is coming out, commentary that's coming out on these issues. Because when you go into the comment section, you see series of trolls that are paid trolls commenting left and right. Let people know that Uyghurs are in the largest concentration camps since Nazi Germany, that Rohingyas are in the largest refugee camps in the world, that Kashmir, the Hindutva fascist movement in India is way beyond yoga and Gandhi. People need to learn about that, and you all are in that position to educate people. I'd suggest engaging reporters. This is supremely important. In your little city, in your town, get to know your local reporters. We always think BBC, CNN, Independent. How about your local news? Those are your neighbors. Those are the people who you have, that's your circle of influence, right? So get to know your local reporters. When a reporter does a good story and connect them to local Uyghurs in your community, to the local Palestinians in your community, to the local Syrians in your, and when they do a good story, comment on them, appreciate them, because it's really hard to be in a newsroom when you're doing difficult stories and you get all this negative feedback but get no positive feedback. Other things you can do is get in touch with your congresspeople. We have 2 bills in Congress for the Uyghurs. There are 2 bills that has been attached to the NDAA. You can call your congresspeople and make sure that the Burma bill does not get taken off the NDAA. This is stuff that you can do. Go to sayuyghur.org/Congress, go to kashmiraction.org/Congress, and you'll see where we made it really easy for you to act on this, where you can get in touch with your congresspeople. Call them every day. I just said this in an earlier session. Every time we walk into a congressperson's office, their foreign policy people can tell me, today, 5 people called on Palestine. Today, 3 people called on Kashmir. They're keeping track. So that is something that you can actually do. And these bills are pretty powerful. They're not, some of them have been watered down, but a lot of them are pretty powerful, and they've been, we're trying to get a Kashmir resolution on board with centering Kashmiri voices, Kashmir's, with the no decision on Kashmir without Kashmiris. This is something that you can definitely do to pray for them, right? This is something that we can definitely do. I keep hearing a lot that, you know, the Muslim countries signed this letter supporting China and the Ummah is dead. I want you guys to prove that the Ummah is not dead, because the Ummah is you and the Ummah is me, right? We are the Ummah. This is psychological warfare on us, where we're being told that the Ummah is dead. When Rohingya people see 10 people standing outside of the Capitol Hill with a sign that said, we protest against Burmese atrocities, and they see those on their WhatsApp in the camps, it gives them hope that someone is watching, someone knows, someone, you know, when the monsoon season comes and their tents get wiped away, what makes them go on and live another day? It's that photograph of you standing outside there going, stop this genocide. So please do not think that the little things that you do don't matter. We don't know in the scale when we go on the day of judgment and we're standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah knows Allah is in control. But this is the small little things that we can do and say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, I tried.
Thank you. Dr. Hatem, when I saw Rashida Tlaib's grandmother on television speaking, and she made it across all the media, and that was an individual story that brought attention to this cause that nobody had been able to get up to that point in terms of in that way. It was a human connection. Can you comment about how we can bring an entire global issue down to one person and how that matters?
I like the story and all that, but I'm a different intellectual person in that sense. Humanizing the human is dehumanizing. The fact that the media humanized Rashida Tlaib's grandmother, it's to be praised, but let's not be mistaken that the humanization of an individual, all of a sudden we have to enter into the whole discourse of trying to humanize the human. You don't see the white supremacists attempting to humanize their mother or grandmother, because they're assumed to be human regardless of what pain and suffering they have inflicted on people. So I want to always, what you call, caution us from to enter that discourse, which essentially comes out from the point of view that you are subhuman, that you have to prove your humanness. So that's on one, while we appreciate that story. I'm a person that is so optimistic about the future that is taking place, regardless of what is occurring around the world. And I don't leave the countries that we're in. I am in a country in here that has 55% of the world market in armaments. They speak peace, but they sell weapons. And I'm in a university that actually manages the two largest arms research lab for the United States. War is business, and the business of war is war. And the fact that we have a continued massive investment in the war machinery Just since 9/11, almost $7 trillion have been committed, yet when we ask for education, everybody says we don't have money. When they ask for healthcare, we have no money. When they ask for welfare, they have no money. But every time that we need to drop a 1-ton bomb on anyone around the southern hemisphere, Muslims and otherwise, there is a limitless pit that is introduced because it's part of the business, and we need to critique that fundamentally. Now, speaking about both Palestine and the questions that we're dealing, why I'm hopeful. In 1992, we ended South Africa apartheid, one of the most vicious settler colonial projects. And if you think that South Africa, that struggled to end apartheid, did not go through the suffering that we're experiencing, then you have not studied the history that took place in South Africa. Palestine will be free. Kashmir will be free. Myanmar will be free. Syria will have its independence and its sovereignty, and they will come back. But it requires for us, we are the ones that are captivated by our luxuries and comfort in this country, that we think that our small comfort and access and negotiating our white picket fence is what is saving us. What is saving you is the fact that you actually can dissent and stand up and I say, I have a different vision for the future for this country and the world. We have to stop selling weapons of mass destruction to the rest of the world. If you want peace, you actually have to stop selling, manufacturing, researching weapons of mass destruction. And if actually I had to take an issue in terms of the rising of China, that's again playing into the clash of civilization of Huntington, which posited that the Chinese and the Muslim posit are the threat to the world. If the Chinese are going to colonize the world, they're only learning what the West have been doing for the past 500 years. Yes, I will take account of what they're doing to the Muslims. I critique them from here to Judgment Day, but simultaneously, I will not align myself with this thesis that say we need to watch for China and therefore begin to work into a new Cold War that uses Muslims as body bags to actually settle accounts between different countries, like what they did with the Cold War between Russia and the United States. We were the body bags in Afghanistan, we were the body bags in North Africa, we were the body bags in Zaire, and many of the southern hemisphere in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and so on. So we need to really wake up, not be woke, but wake up in order to understand what is it that we're struggling for and what type of world that we need to have, both as Muslims as well as for the humanity. When people die, we have to ask that question, why they are dying, who's actually causing the killing, and who's benefiting from the killing machines that are there. If we don't ask those questions, then we are complicit by silence, one, and second, by actually focusing on the wrong questions or asking the wrong questions. 50% of knowledge is asking the correct questions. If you ask the wrong questions, then your knowledge is completely useless to actually transform your own condition as a human being. And as Muslims, we have to ask the correct question in order to come with the right answers collectively for ourselves and the rest of the world.
So Dr. Ibrahim said this was the most depressing panel of the whole conference. So I'm going to ask Safa to give us to end on a hopeful note.
Yes. So I'm thinking of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam standing in Quraysh with about less than 40 people around him, telling his companions a verse in the Quran that I consider I consider it the ultimate miracle of the Quran, where he says, هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله. That verse was revealed to him in Mecca with less than 40 followers, where he was starting to be, and his followers to be persecuted. That was crazy statement to make, but it was the correct statement, and history testified to it. The same Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the one that says, إذا قامت الساعة وفي يد أحدكم فسيلة فليغرسها. That if it is the day of judgment happening right there and then, and in the hand of the one of you a seedling, a little plant that wanted to put into the ground, let that person continue planting that seed. And so our faith is a faith of hope, always. And we are accountable for only what we can do. Now, as far as for all of us as a group, let me tell you one thing, is that the same kind of things that are now happening that is requiring very powerful and mighty governments to use open killings, massacres, and genocide to accomplish. They were accomplishing 40, 50 years ago without having to fire a bullet in many cases. The same regimes that today cannot sit on the chests of the Syrian people, the Libyan people, the Yemeni people, the Egyptian people, without the blunt force of firepower. 40, 50 years ago, similar regimes were basically being celebrated as being heroes of nationalism, heroes of this or that. What does that tell us? It tells us that basically we're marching in a direction where the games that those in power have played over the last 50 years successfully and pulled, a quick one over the eyes, people are no longer working, which tells us that they realize they are scared to death, that the people who are marching for freedom, for justice, are gaining ground, are able to make a difference, are no longer ignorant, are no longer naive enough for them to tell them the lies and for them to believe it. And so, for me, we're marching in a very, very specific direction, and that is the direction of justice and freedom. The price is high, yes, but everything that those supervillains are doing tells me that they are more scared than ever, and the march is reaching their comfort zone and eventually will overtake them, and we will have a better tomorrow, inshallah, with each and every one of us contributing to that on their individual levels in a way that they can, in their locality, to the extent that they can, inshallah, and the collection of that will be a new dawn for all people in the world, not only Muslims, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
And with those words, I'd like to thank our 5 panelists for their wonderful words of wisdom and hope and encouragement. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Welcome to ISNA Con 2019. What's your superpower for social good?